On the morning of my 65th birthday, I received the most outrageous gift of my life. My son, the boy I had raised and sacrificed for over the decades, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You should move into a retirement home. Leave the house and the money to me." I didn't argue. I didn't shed a tear. I simply smiled, walked into the city's most luxurious senior residence and signed the admission papers. That same day I finalized a trust to cut him off completely. No more access to my assets and not a shred of pity left for him. Without me, his world crumbled overnight. As for me, my real life began the moment I closed that door behind me. I never imagined I'd spend my 65th birthday like this. All I wanted was a quiet dinner. In the kitchen, I made my signature chicken and rice casserole, paired with creamy mushroom soup and a crisp Caesar salad. The air was filled with the warm scent of home-cooked comfort, and the dining table was already set. Silverware polished, candles in their holders, waiting for my son to come home. He hadn't set foot in this house for an entire year. I remember when he was little, every year on my birthday he'd hide by the kitchen door with a bunch of wildflowers in his tiny hands, peeking around the corner. "Happy birthday, Mommy," he'd whisper, eyes shining with pride. But now, I couldn't remember the last time he called me Mom. I glanced at the clock on the living room wall. 7:30 in the evening. He had promised a surprise tonight. But so far not even a hint of his presence. I lit the candles. Then blew them out. Lit them again. Eventually I gave up. It was 8:30 when the front door finally creaked open. Surprise. Colin stumbled in, reeking of alcohol, a lazy smirk stretched across his face. Before I could say a word, a woman followed him in, clinging to his arm, dressed in gaudy clothes, her makeup heavy, one hand balancing an oversized handbag, the other resting on a noticeably pregnant belly. "Mom, here's the surprise I was talking about," Colin said, his voice thick with sarcasm. "This is Tessa, my new fiancée. She's 6 months along." I stood frozen. "We figured it's a good time for you to move back in for a bit," he added casually. "Tessa's due soon and will need help during the recovery phase. You're retired anyway, might as well make yourself useful." Tessa tilted her head, giving me a once-over, then wrinkled her nose. "She doesn't exactly look fit enough for baby duty. Are you sure this'll work?" I didn't move. My fingers tightened around the hem of my dress. "Of course," Colin continued with a shrug as if we were discussing the weather. "If you're not up for it, there's always the nursing home. I mean, those nice ones don't come cheap and I really hate wasting money." His voice held no warmth. No concern. Just a veiled threat wrapped in cold indifference. I let out a laugh, quiet, almost weightless. "So the big surprise was to offer me a job as your babysitter? And if I don't comply, you've already picked out a budget nursing home." He blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct response. "Come on, Mom, don't be like that. Didn't you always say family comes first? Well, now your family needs you." I didn't answer. I turned and walked upstairs without another word. Everything was crystal clear now. He hadn't stayed away for a year because he was busy. He stayed away because I was only useful when needed. The meal I had so carefully prepared sat untouched on the table, going cold, just like the last thread of warmth I felt for this house. That night, I sat by the window in my bedroom and dialed the number for Skyview Estate, the finest senior living residence in the city. "Good evening, thank you for calling Skyview. How may we assist you?" "I'd like to reserve a premium independent living suite," I said calmly. "For 20 years. Paid in full." "Ma'am, are you certain? That's a significant amount." "I'm certain. Would you like to list any family members as your emergency contact?" I paused. Then said softly, "No family." There was silence on the other end. "Understood. We'll have your private relocation and wellness team at your residence in 5 days." "Thank you." I ended the call and let my eyes drift to the vanity across the room, where 2 old photographs sat. One was of Richard and me, taken in the early days of our research careers, lab coats and bright hopes. The other was of a laughing baby Colin cradled in my arms. I reached out and turned the second one face down. A quiet chill settled in my chest. Maybe, I thought, at 65 I no longer owed anyone my dignity. That night, for the first time in my life, I felt truly relieved. The next morning, as soon as I came downstairs, I heard the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, and Tessa's grating voice echoing off the walls. "This kitchen is so outdated," she complained, tapping the tiled countertop with her manicured fingernail like she was touching a moldy carpet. "No steam oven, no air fryer. How am I supposed to make healthy food for the baby in here?" Colin was slouched at the dining table, scrolling lazily through his phone. He didn't even look up before saying, "Morning, Mom. Mind fixing us some breakfast? Tessa's been really picky lately." I stared at the untouched casserole from the night before, still sitting on the counter. My carefully prepared birthday dinner, ignored like it was nothing more than leftover scraps. "You didn't even touch the food I made yesterday," I said, my voice flat. Colin shrugged without guilt. "Tessa said it smelled too strong. Her nose is super sensitive with the pregnancy." Tessa chimed in immediately, "Yeah, the whole house reeked. That greasy smell made me want to throw up. Honestly, ordering in would have been easier." I quietly gathered the cold dishes, ready to throw them out. But as I opened the trash bin, something stopped me. There was my mushroom soup. The one I had spent 2 hours simmering, poured straight into the garbage. The spoon was still in the bowl. I held the ceramic dish in my hands, knuckles whitening with pressure. "You two staying here is temporary," I said at last, my voice calm, too calm like the still air before a summer storm. "This house isn't a hotel. And it's definitely not a maternity retreat." Colin frowned. "What's that supposed to mean? Tessa's carrying my child. Can't you be a little more supportive? I mean, the house will be mine eventually anyway." "That child is yours," I said, looking him in the eye. "Not mine. I'm 65. I'm not your nanny, your maid, or your backup plan. You didn't used to be like this." Colin snapped, his voice rising. "You used to love me. What happened to you? How did you get so cold?" I almost laughed. He was right. I did love him, too much perhaps. Enough that he mistook it for something he was entitled to forever. Cold. I turned to face him fully, each word deliberate. "You want to talk about cold? Cold is showing up on your mother's birthday with a pregnant stranger, treating her like a live-in servant, and threatening to dump her in a nursing home when she says no." His mouth twitched, but no words came out. Tessa broke the silence. "Colin, don't argue with her. If she doesn't want to help, we can just hire someone. No need to stay here and be treated like this." Then she gave him a little nudge, her voice dripping with implication. "Didn't you say your mom still had some savings? We're short on cash for the investment, remember? If she really cares about you, wouldn't she want to help out?" I stared into Tessa's eyes, and all I could see was the unfiltered greed behind her practiced smile. Made my stomach turn. "So that's what this is really about," I said quietly. "You're not here for me. You're here for my money." Colin's face tightened. "Don't say that about Tessa. He was just making a suggestion. And if you do have money, what's so wrong with helping your only son?" "Well, then I have a suggestion of my own," I said, my voice like ice. "You two need to leave. This home doesn't welcome you anymore." The air thickened in an instant. Colin jumped to his feet. "Are you serious right now? You're kicking us out." I looked at his face, so indignant, so entitled, and said evenly, "Do I not have that right?" He shook his head in disbelief. "You're old. I'm your only son. Who do you think is going to take care of you when you're too frail to walk? You think that money's going to keep you company?" Tessa, emboldened by his outburst, added with a sneer, "Exactly. If anyone's leaving, it should be you. Colin and I aren't going anywhere. And don't even think about taking the money or assets with you. They'll stay right here, where they belong." I didn't respond. I just looked at them both, calm and silent, a bitter laugh forming inside me. They had completely forgotten who this house truly belonged to. In that moment, something inside me finally shifted. The last shred of hope I'd held onto for my son burned out like a dying candle. And I knew, this time I wasn't going back. I would no longer live my life for anyone else but myself. 2 days passed and the house no longer felt like mine. Tessa had taken over the living room, decorating a so-called baby corner, with pink streamers, cartoon pillows and glittering balloon letters. It looked like she was trying to turn the whole house into her own personal nursery. There wasn't even a quiet spot left where I could sit and enjoy a cup of coffee. Even the kitchen had become her territory. She reorganized the cabinets to suit her own system, tossing my carefully labeled pill boxes, tea canisters and recipe binders into the storage closet like clutter. Colin, meanwhile, spent most of his time holed up in the study, pacing through endless phone calls, voice tight with stress. From what I could gather, his so-called new venture wasn't going well. More than once I overheard him complaining about cash flow to whoever was on the other end. Neither of them had mentioned my birthday again. As if that night had never happened. I thought I was prepared, thought I'd hardened enough not to be surprised. But some moments still managed to catch me off guard. That afternoon, after trimming roses in the garden, I stepped into the kitchen only to find Tessa stuffing my set of fine bone china into a cardboard box. "This stuff is so dated," she muttered with a wrinkled nose. "I'm getting a more modern set. Colin said you wouldn't mind." "That set belonged to my mother," I said quietly, standing in the doorway. She glanced back, visibly annoyed. "Well, she's gone, isn't she? You can't live in the past forever." "This is my home," I said firmly. "Not yours. And it's not up to you." She scoffed, biting her lip before snapping. "You sure act like this place is yours, but let's be honest. Won't it all belong to Colin soon anyway?" I smiled then, calm, unshaken. "You're really that sure Colin's still getting this house?" That gave her pause. But after a brief moment she turned away without a word, leaving the boxes behind, the bone china half-packed, discarded like trash. I crouched down and carefully began placing the dishes back into the cabinet, one piece at a time. Each one felt like a small act of defiance, a way of holding on, just a little longer. But I knew I couldn't do this alone. That evening I dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. "Hello." A warm, familiar voice answered. It was Martha, the woman who had helped me manage this household for years. Colin had dismissed her last year without asking me, claiming there was no need to keep an old maid on payroll for a house with only one occupant. "It's me, Martha," I said softly. There was a stunned pause, then an outpouring of emotion. "Ma'am, oh thank God. I've been praying every day that you were all right. I kept wondering if I should just show up on your doorstep." "I'm okay," I said, throat tight. "But I need you to come back." She arrived that very afternoon. Just like old times, she burst through the door, shrugged off her coat and headed straight for the kitchen. "What in the world? Take-out containers in the fridge. Ma'am, how have you been eating this garbage?" "I can still cook," I said with a weary smile. "But the kitchen doesn't really belong to me anymore." She paused, then glanced toward the living room. "That girl." I nodded. "I always said the young master had poor judgment," Martha muttered. "But this takes the cake. She's just like all the others, except worse. And now even you're being bullied by her? Oh no. I'm not letting that slide." Right then Tessa came downstairs. She stopped when she saw Martha, her face twisting in displeasure. "Colin, your mom hired someone again? I thought we agreed to cut back on spending." Martha stood tall, staring her down. "I was hired by the lady of the house. That's who I answer to, not you." Tessa scoffed, waddled to the couch and plopped down without a word. But the hostility in her eyes was unmistakable. For dinner, Martha made my favorite, beef stew and vegetable soup. I ate slowly, each bite like stitching together parts of myself that had started to unravel. When Colin came home, the scent of food hit him immediately. He sniffed the air and grinned. "Smells good tonight." Martha appeared from the kitchen, still holding the pot. "Sir, this was your favorite when you were a boy. Remember?" Colin's smile faltered. His face went stiff with discomfort. "What are you doing here?" he asked, frowning. "Didn't I tell you you were retired?" "I brought her back," I said evenly. "Mom?" Colin sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're being stubborn again. I know you don't like Tessa, but she's carrying your grandchild. Can't you try to be a little more understanding?" "Understanding?" I let out a soft laugh. "You think I brought Martha back because I don't like Tessa?" I pointed at the dining table. "This is a home. Not a rental. Not a crash pad. You don't get to erase everything that made this place mine." "Mom, do you even hear yourself? You're ruining our chance to be a real family." "If this is what you call a family," I said calmly, "then I'd rather be alone." Colin slammed his fork down on the table with a loud clatter, rattling the dishes. He jumped to his feet, shouting, "Fine. Go ahead and be your little lonely queen. But don't come crawling when you're old and helpless and no one's around to care for you." I met his glare, unwavering. Better to live clear-eyed and alone than blindly used. In that moment I knew something had shifted between us for good. Whatever bond we once had, whatever illusion of mother and son, We had both crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I no longer hoped for him to understand me. I no longer believed he would change. All I wanted now was to spend the rest of my years without sacrificing my dignity for anyone. The sky outside the kitchen window was still dim when I finished my second cup of coffee at the dining table. Martha moved quietly through the kitchen preparing breakfast. She didn't ask many questions, she never needed to. Her eyes swept across the thick stack of documents beside me, and she finally asked in a low voice, "Ma'am, are you certain about this?" I gave a small nod and gently closed the folder. This wasn't some emotional impulse. It was a decision long in the making. For years, Colin's defiance and cruelty had cut into me like tiny blades, but I kept making excuses for him, telling myself he was just lost, that he'd come around eventually. After all, I had poured so much of my life into raising him. But now I could finally admit it. The place I once called home no longer belonged to me. Skyview's transition team is arriving at 10 tomorrow morning, I said quietly. I want everything to go smoothly. Martha froze at the stove, her eyes glistening. "Ma'am, you've lived in this house most of your life." "That's exactly why it's time to say goodbye," I replied. She nodded without a word and returned to organizing my pill case. At 9:30, Colin shuffled into the living room, looking like he hadn't slept a wink. Shadows pooled under his eyes, and he carried Tessa's insulated flask like it was made of lead. As he entered the kitchen, he gave Martha a lazy wave. "Can you make an egg sandwich or something? Tessa only wants your cooking now." "She didn't seem to like this kitchen 2 days ago," Martha replied, cold as steel. Colin frowned but didn't respond. He sank onto the sofa and turned on the television. I watched him, the man who used to crawl into my lap as a boy, who used to beg me to read him bedtime stories. Now he felt more like a stranger renting space in my house. "Colin, we need to talk," I said softly. "Can it wait?" he muttered without looking at me. I just sat down. "Now," I said firmer this time. He finally turned off the TV and looked over, exasperated. "Are you still mad? Mom, I've told you, Tessa means well. She's just blunt. She says things how they are. That's not what this is about." I pulled a single document from the folder and laid it on the table in front of him. "This is my residential plan for Skyview Estate. Tomorrow morning I'm moving in." At first Colin didn't react. He flipped through a few pages casually. But when his eyes landed on phrases like long-term occupancy, 24-hour concierge service, and advanced medical care, something in his expression shifted. "You're serious?" "I am." He was quiet for a moment. Then he forced a chuckle. "Well, maybe a retirement community isn't the worst idea. Go clear your head for a bit. If you get bored, I can always find you another place." I looked at him steadily. "I'm not coming back." His smile froze mid-expression. "I'll be transferring the ownership of this house to Martha and a few close friends who've stood by me through the years." Colin shot to his feet. "What the hell are you talking about? You're giving the house to the help. They've stood beside me for decades. That's more than you can say." "Mom, this is insane. I'm your son. And yet you've never treated me like your mother. The moment you came back here with Tessa, demanding the house and my savings as if they were your birthright, that's the moment you stopped being my son. You're just a man who uses blood ties to manipulate affection." His face flushed red. His fingers trembled with rage. "I knew something was off about you lately. You've been doing all this behind my back. You had time to decide what I should cook, who I should take care of, where I should live, but you never stopped to ask what I wanted." He spat a curse under his breath. "Fine. Keep the house. But don't tell me you're planning to throw all your money away too." Without a word, I unfolded a second document and spread it across the coffee table. "This is the trust one signed this morning. All my assets will be used to support my care and medical needs at Skyview. The remainder will be allocated to a foundation for young artists, supporting their education and exhibitions." His eyes scanned the page, growing wider by the second. "You're giving your money to some stupid art fund?" "That stupid fund is a reflection of what matters to me now," I said evenly. "Better that the money goes to someone chasing a dream than be squandered by someone who only knows how to take." He let out a bitter laugh. "You've lost your mind. Who the hell sets up a charity fund at your age?" "I do." I met his gaze without flinching. "Because it's my money. And I'm the only one who gets to decide what it's for." The air between us thickened, heavy and silent. Just then the doorbell rang. Martha opened it, revealing Skyview's transition team. 3 professionals in tailored suits, calm and polite, carrying clipboards, a moving checklist and medical intake forms. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," one of them said with a courteous smile. "We're here to walk you through your final onboarding before your move tomorrow." Colin paled. The color drained from his face as realization dawned. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't temporary. This was real. And I was leaving. "Mom, you're really going through with this?" His voice cracked. "You're handing this house over to strangers and just walking away from me?" I calmly gathered the paperwork back into its folder and stood. "I'm not the one walking away, Colin," I said softly. "You already shut the door on me a long time ago. From now on my life will be my own. And you will never again decide what I do with it." Morning at Skyview was quiet and full of light. I sat in a wicker chair on the balcony, a warm cup of rose tea beside me, watching the lake shimmer gently in the morning sun. The air smelled of something I hadn't breathed in for years: freedom. There were no raised voices, no hungry stares, no one asking me for anything. The Skyview team had handled everything with seamless grace. The dietitian designed my meal plans, the nurses logged my health data each day, and my calendar was filled with gardening classes, floral workshops, and art salons. It felt like every corner of my spirit, long forgotten, was slowly waking back up. For the first time in decades, I didn't have to tiptoe around someone's mood or needs. My time belonged entirely to me. On a video call, Martha told me everything at the old house was running smoothly. The property now officially belonged to her and a few trusted friends who had served with loyalty for years. As for me, I had no intention of ever going back. That afternoon I began unpacking a few of my older belongings. When I'd moved into Skyview, I'd asked the concierge team to bring a private trunk I hadn't opened in years. Inside, buried beneath layers of velvet, was a heavy wooden frame I'd nearly forgotten about. I lifted the cloth and there it was, her signature still perfectly intact in the lower right corner. Emily Harrington. She had been my closest friend in college. This was the last painting she ever gave me. After graduation, Emily had set off on a traveling fellowship with her brushes and her dreams. I stayed behind, diving into my career and eventually into a marriage that would reshape the course of my life. We had drifted, quietly, inevitably, into different worlds. She had titled the painting Orchids at Dusk and sent it to me with a handwritten note. "I know how much you love orchids in the evening light. I hope you'll always remember the dreams we once shared." I'd kept it sealed away in my study all those years, not for its market value but because it meant too much. But now, resting in the sunlit living room of Skyview, the painting seemed to take on new meaning. I was no longer the woman who ran a household who lived in service to others. I was finally someone who had the space and the right to reclaim her inner world. As I stared at the painting, a quiet thought took root. Maybe it was time to share these things I'd hidden for so long. Maybe I could do something real, for young artists like Emily once was. Back then, I had no idea that painting would mark the start of a new journey. Until this morning, when the front desk at Skyview handed me an envelope, an invitation from the city's Museum of Art. An exhibition of Emily's final works. The theme, Women and Nature. 3 months ago, I donated several of Emily's late-period pieces to the museum. Orchids at Dusk had been included. An art review quarterly called it a rare and radiant elegy to life. Those canvases had sat in my study for decades, too personal to show, too precious to share. But now I was ready. The exhibition exploded across the media. New York Arts Weekly ran a full-page spread. Eleanor Whitmore donates Emily Harrington's final works, a monumental gift to American women's art. As I was organizing the exhibition papers, Skyview's media coordinator appeared at my door with a video call request from Martha. I accepted it. She stood at the front gate of the old house, her expression unreadable. "Ma'am," she said, "your donations made the headlines." Colin saw it and nearly flipped the coffee table. I chuckled. Isn't he still busy trying to replace the living room couch with some overpriced Italian piece? Martha sighed. It's not the art that bothers him. It's that he was too late. She paused. He told me today, those paintings should have been family heirlooms. Then he asked if you had anything else valuable stashed away. I nodded slowly. So, He's finally afraid. She gave a wry smile. Even more interesting, someone from the bank came by. He'd applied for a personal loan. It was denied. His accounts have been frozen. He asked if you had anything to do with it. I didn't touch his money, I replied evenly. I simply revoked his access to my sub-accounts and terminated all automatic transfers. The rest was always up to him. Of course. Martha's tone sharpened. He tried to offer up the house as collateral. That's when he found out. Official title's already in our name. I smiled faintly. The final piece of the puzzle is in place. She hesitated. Ma'am, you're really not leaving anything behind for him? I paused. Then gently I said, there's one thing. A letter. When the time comes, give him the key to the safe. Martha nodded. Quiet now. I ended the call and turned back toward the window. Outside, the gardener was trimming roses. A group of residents gathered by the gazebo, sharing tips about flower arranging. 2 young women were practicing violin near the fountain, their notes floating into the air like something sacred. And somewhere beyond that peaceful world, my son, the boy I once centered my life around, was just beginning to learn what loss truly felt like. Only now did he realize he no longer had me, and he had no more power over me. But this was only the beginning. Night had fallen over the city, cloaking it in shadow and neon. Rain from earlier in the evening still slicked the streets, reflecting the blur of headlights and storefront signs. Colin stood beneath the buzzing glow of a bar sign, slouched against the doorway like he no longer had the strength to hold himself upright. The cigarette between his fingers had long since burned down, but he didn't flick the ash. He didn't even seem to notice it. His face was hollowed by exhaustion, dark circles carved beneath his eyes, and the faint stink of smoke and stale whiskey clung to his unshaven jaw. I had long stopped keeping tabs on Colin's life. But no matter how far I stepped away, his name still found its way to me. From news, acquaintances, whispers I never asked to hear. In the past month he had tried everything. He begged friends for loans, pitched his half-baked business ideas to any investor who'd listen, and even made feeble attempts to reach out to me, hoping I'd change my mind. No one was buying what he was selling anymore. I had severed every financial tether he'd once relied on. The house had been transferred, the accounts frozen. He no longer had access to any sub-accounts under my name, and every auto payment on his credit cards had been terminated. His loan applications were denied. His calls went unanswered. And even she had begun to lose patience. Colin, when exactly are you going to get the money? Her voice, once syrupy sweet, now carried the clipped edge of someone running out of excuses to stay. She had believed she was marrying into luxury. She pictured a life of ease with a well-groomed heir, the kind of man whose mother would always keep the cash flowing. But now she was watching that fantasy rot in real time, as Colin slipped from entitled trust fund prince to a man with mounting debts and no one left to fool. That afternoon, after finishing a gardening workshop, I sat on my balcony sifting through proposals for the foundation. One caught my eye. An arts high school in Boston had submitted a request. They wanted to establish a studio in honor of Emily Harrington, dedicated to nurturing young artists from low-income families. I approved the grant on the spot. Attached to the approval, I included a freshly printed letterhead from the foundation. The gesture, the purpose, it all meant far more to me than handing Colin a check ever could. Just before dinner, Martha's video call came through. She stood outside the old house, her face drawn and serious. "Ma'am, I need to update you," she said, voice low. "Colin's not doing well." I didn't speak. I simply nodded, giving her space to go on. "He's been rejected for multiple loans. None of his old friends will touch his calls. Word is he's been spotted at a couple casinos, and he's already racked up a significant amount of debt." I set down my teacup without a word. I wasn't surprised. Not really. The moment he chose to use a mother's love as a bargaining chip, he had already taken the first step toward losing everything. "Someone saw him at a private club the other night," Martha went on. "He lost big. Tried to use the house as collateral, only to find out too late that the deed wasn't in his name anymore. People say he nearly lost it right there." I closed my eyes for a moment and took a slow, deep breath. "I've done enough," I said quietly. "If he still can't see what's broken, then no one can save him." There was a pause. Then Martha asked gently, Do you plan to see him again? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned my gaze to the still water of the lake beyond the balcony. I knew the day would come, one final meeting between mother and son. But it would not be a reunion. It would be goodbye. For good. The day he showed up at Skyview's front gate, I was working on the Foundation's annual report. A nurse knocked gently as I was revising a section of the document. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said softly, "there's a man at the front desk. He says he's your family." I set my pen down without rushing to respond. Instead I asked, "What does he look like?" The nurse hesitated, then quietly replied, "He looks tired. And a bit rough." I nodded, stood and pulled on my coat. As I walked toward the entrance, I spotted him from a distance, standing off to the side of the garden path, near the hydrangeas just beginning to bloom. He looked like a shell of the man he once tried so hard to be. His clothes were wrinkled and stained, his hair unkempt, his face shadowed by patchy stubble. The pride that used to gleam in his eyes was gone. We locked eyes for several seconds. The first words out of his mouth weren't "hello" or "I came to see you." They were, "You won." I stood at the top of the steps, watching the man who used to be my son, now just a boy who'd finally run out of escape routes. "Colin," I said quietly, "this was never a competition. I never needed to win against you." He gave a bitter smile. "I've got nothing left. Even Tessa's gone." I nodded. It didn't stir much in me. "What is it you want from me?" I asked. He opened his mouth, searching for words. Eventually he dropped his gaze. I really messed up." I sighed. That I messed up felt emptier than the ones he used to mumble as a child, teary-eyed over a broken vase. Because this time I knew he wasn't sorry. He was stranded. "I don't even have a place to stay now," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Are you really just going to leave me like this?" I stood silent for a long moment. "I'm not abandoning you, Colin. I'm allowing you to take responsibility for yourself." He looked up, something flickering in his eyes. Rage or grief, I couldn't tell. "You didn't used to be like this." "No," I said. "I wasn't. I used to be the kind of mother who gave up everything for you. Even my dignity. But that woman doesn't live here anymore. You can call it cruel. You can call it cold. But understand this, you brought us here." I turned and walked back inside. The door closed softly behind me. I could feel him still standing there on the other side, but he didn't call out. Not once. That night as I lay in bed, the lake lapped gently against the shore outside my window. I thought of him as a baby, how he used to curl in my arms, babbling and cooing, trying to form words. Back then I believed that if I loved him enough he would grow into a kind, responsible man. I was wrong. Real growth doesn't come from being carried. It comes from learning to stand alone. I had let go. And he had a long road ahead. As for me, I still had so much left to do. So many people to support. And so many chapters of life yet to write. I never thought I'd be starting over at this stage of life. But that's how life works, isn't it? The chapters that truly belong to you often don't begin until you've convinced yourself the story is already over. Spring at Skyview is beautiful. The tulips in the garden have just begun to peek through the soil, and the lawn is dotted with patches of violets, like dreams quietly scattered across the grass. I sat on the balcony with the latest grant list from the foundation resting in my lap. Since its founding, the Emily Harrington Art Foundation has supported 12 young artists, 2 of whom are now preparing for their first solo exhibitions. We've partnered with several local high schools to provide free art classes and materials for children from low-income families. People often ask me, "Mrs. Whitmore, what inspired you to devote your later years to arts education?" I always smile and say, I simply chose to give what would have been wasted wealth to those who actually create something with it. But the truth is, all of this has been a gift to myself. Each effort, each grant, each student supported, it's my way of saying, I still have value. I still have purpose. And I still have the power to shape something meaningful. That evening, I was invited to attend a small exhibition hosted by the foundation. The venue was Skyview's multipurpose hall, transformed into a cozy and elegant gallery. A group of students stood proudly beside their artwork, chatting and laughing, their eyes bright with hope. A girl named Nora approached me shyly. Her painting was a minimalist watercolor of a lone woman standing by a lake, with a single orchid in full bloom beside her. "I painted this for you," she said softly. I heard you really love orchids. I smiled and took the painting in my hands. Thank you, Nora, I said. You know, this looks a lot like me. Her eyes widened. Really? Really, I nodded. But not anymore. I'm not the woman standing alone at the edge of the lake. Not anymore. I've stepped into my own life. After the exhibit, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the moonlight dance across the lake's surface. Somewhere in the distance I could hear children's laughter, and in the next room, the seniors' choir was rehearsing, faint harmonies floating in and out like a lullaby. Life was quiet now. And kind. Later that night, Martha sent me a message. The community garden at the old house had finally been renovated. She attached a photo. Old friends in the kitchen laughing over pots and pans, fresh herbs and roses blooming in the yard. It looked livelier than it ever did when I lived there. I replied, "Take good care of that home. Think of it as your second chapter." She wrote back, "You didn't just give us a house. You gave us dignity." I stared at her message for a long moment, eyes misting. Only then did I realize, what I thought I had lost wasn't lost at all. It had simply been transformed. A few days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. From Colin. The writing was uneven, shaky. But I recognized it instantly. He said he'd finally read the last letter I left for him. Said he truly understood now how deeply he'd failed. Said he had moved into a low-income apartment in the suburbs, taken a job as a warehouse clerk, and started trying to quit gambling. He said he knew this was the life he had earned and he didn't expect forgiveness. But that maybe one day he hoped to stand before me, not to ask for anything but simply to be seen again, honestly, as a changed man. I didn't write back. But I placed the letter gently in my drawer, right next to Emily's painting. Maybe one day I'll forgive him. But not today. Not because I'm still angry, but because I've finally learned to put myself first. This morning, the sun rose soft and golden as I walked alone along the garden path at Skyview. The breeze was warm and I felt lighter somehow, like a part of me had finally let go. I knew my story wasn't over. Maybe I had spent the first half of my life living for others. Caring, pleasing, compromising, trying not to take up too much space. But the rest of it? That would belong to me. May my steps never again be dragged down by anyone. May my heart never again shrink to fit inside someone else's world. And may everything that comes after 65 finally, gloriously be mine.
Only when a man hits rock bottom does he finally begin to look back and truly see who stood beside him when he was on top. I used to think I had it all, money, time, a future paved with ease. It wasn't until I lost everything that I realized life doesn't come with a reset button. My name is Colin Whitmore. Once people called me the Golden Boy. Wealthy, sharp, well-connected, destined for success. Now, I'm just a man with nothing to his name. I want to tell my story, not to defend myself, not to ask for pity, but to try and make sense of it all. To lay it out piece by piece, and understand how I managed to ruin a winning hand so completely. Lately, I've been dreaming about my childhood. Back then, life was good. No perfect. Mom would hum that old tune while baking apple pie in the kitchen, the scent floating through the air like a promise. Outside the window, her rose bushes bloomed in soft clusters, and I'd sit on a little stool, waiting for the first slice to cool while asking her, "Mom, will you always stay with me?" She'd smile and nod every time. "Of course, sweetheart." She had such delicate hands, capable of turning plain white paper into little masterpieces for my school projects. Dad was a gentle, bookish man, a university professor who loved reading poetry on the couch. He worked late most nights, but every weekend without fail, he'd take me fishing by the lake. "Boys need to learn patience, Colin," he'd say. "If you can wait for the fish, you can wait for life." He didn't say much, but there was always something steady and warm in his eyes. They loved me, deeply, and I loved them back with the full force of a child's heart. When I caught a cold or ran a fever, Mom would stay up all night by my side. On my birthdays, Dad never brought toys, he gave me books. He used to say, "What a man should be proud of is his mind, not his wallet." I didn't understand those words back then. Love felt automatic, unshakable. I never imagined what it might feel like to lose it. Dad's death came out of nowhere, a heart attack that struck like lightning. I remember that night, Mom clutching me, sobbing like a child herself. I cried too, but what I really felt was fear. Fear that the roof above us had cracked, that we had no one left to hold it up. But Mom didn't fall apart. She stepped up, took charge of Dad's affairs, restructured the family trust, handled every little detail with her own 2 hands. And I got used to being taken care of. I respected her. I really did. But somewhere along the way, that respect twisted into something else. She gave me everything I ever wanted: clothes, toys, tuition, opportunities. I never went without good things. Not once. And what did I give her in return? Just a son who came home less and less. A voice that grew colder with every visit. And disappointment after disappointment, stacked like unpaid debts. I first got a taste of the circle in high school. Kids like me, rich, entitled, untouchable. Their dads owned half the city in real estate. Their moms ran art galleries and threw fundraisers like fashion shows. After school, they'd peel off in sports cars, hit the beach with champagne, talk big about venture capital and connections, as if the world already belonged to them. The first time I went to one of their parties, I watched a guy pop a bottle of Dom Perignon, just to hear the room cheer. I didn't know why, but something inside me snapped to attention. That night, I realized something. Status is the only passport that matters. So I changed. I started hating the clean but modest shirts Mom picked out for me. I begged her for overpriced designer brands with loud logos and empty prestige. I started turning up my nose at Martha's warm, wholesome meals. No more dinners at home, just ribeye steaks at trendy restaurants and overpriced wine I couldn't pronounce. I surrounded myself with the kind of friends who measured worth in wristwatches and bottle service. They took me to nightclubs, private poker rooms, luxury boutiques. And I spent, God, did I spend. The moment I pulled out that black card, I felt invincible. Like the heir I wanted to be. Like someone important. And Mom, she became the one person I couldn't stand to face. She'd ask, "What VE you been working on lately?" I'd wave it off, projects. She'd say, "You're spending too much." I'd sneer, "What's money for if not to spend?" She'd press, "You need to take responsibility for yourself." And I'd shoot back, "Then why leave me an inheritance at all?" The more she tried to reach me, the more I pulled away. She didn't get it, didn't get me. She didn't understand that I was trying to belong to a world where money meant something. So I began to see her not as my mother, but as a hurdle. The more she disapproved of my friends, the more I clung to them. The more she criticized my lifestyle, the more extravagantly I flaunted it. It wasn't that I didn't know I was letting her down. I just didn't care. I told myself she was bitter, that she resented my freedom, that she was tight-fisted, old-fashioned, controlling. My friends echoed that lie. She just doesn't want you to surpass her, they said. She's jealous. So I stopped going home. And when I did, it was only to say, I need some startup cash. I've got this investment opportunity. This is groundwork for our future. At first, she tried to reason with me. Later, she just went silent. Eventually, she stopped setting a place for me at the table. I didn't mind. I told myself she was finally learning her place. But she never gave up. She still wired me money every month. Still had Martha bring me medicine when I was sick. I never said thank you. Once, I nearly got dragged into an illegal investment scheme. She found me a lawyer, cleaned up the mess behind the scenes. And I stormed home and yelled at her for interfering in my life. She just looked at me, tired, quiet. I just want to help you avoid the worst mistakes, she said. But it's my life, I snapped. You don't get to control me forever. Looking back, that might have been the cruelest thing I ever said to her. But the worst came later. Her 60th birthday. I came back home, not to celebrate, but to make a move. I brought Tessa, who was pregnant. We needed money, and I figured her pregnancy would make a perfect bargaining chip. I told myself it was strategic. Mom had that massive house, all to herself. The family trust, the foundation funds, it was all sitting there, untouched. She'd never not helped me before. Of course she'd help now. I thought I had it all planned. We'd present Tessa and the baby as the surprise, say we wanted to keep the family together, then ask for her to move in and help with postpartum care. Once she was softened up, I'd ease in the real request for financial support just until we were on our feet. I thought I was being clever, but she saw through me in an instant. When she said, "So the big surprise is you want me to be your nanny?" I felt the ground shift beneath me. For the first time, I realized she wasn't going to play her part anymore. And I panicked. But I pretended I was still in control. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just disappeared, quietly, completely. No dramatics. No confrontation. She signed her name on the Skyview agreement. Set up a trust. Transferred the deed to the house. Cut off every stream of financial support. Each action, deliberate and steady, like she was writing a final farewell in ink I couldn't erase. And still, I thought she'd come back. I remember the day she handed me the Skyview residency paperwork. My first reaction wasn't shock. It was rage. Not because she was leaving, but because she had the nerve to walk away without my permission. I was used to her waiting in place. Used to her forgiving me without question. Used to her staying soft, no matter how hard I pushed. I thought she'd always be that woman, the one who patted my head even after I shattered her favorite porcelain cup and whispered, "It's all right, sweetheart. Don't cry." But this time she turned around. And when she left, she took everything with her. The money, the house, the identity I'd borrowed like a costume. Even the love I used to pretend I didn't need, she took that too. I went to friends asking for loans. They said, "Colin, that guy, his little tricks stopped working years ago." I applied for credit. The bank said, "Sorry, your linked accounts have been deactivated." I tried to use the house as collateral. That's when I found out I didn't own the house anymore. And then Tessa left too. She walked out without a word. And just like that, I had nothing left to leverage. No baby, no partner, no excuse to crawl back to mom one more time. So I gambled. Told myself I'd win it back in one night, maybe two. But I lost, again and again. And with every bet, I lost a little more of myself. By the time I stood outside Skyview's gates, I didn't even recognize who I was. Then I saw her, emerging from the sunlight like she belonged to it. Calm. Clear-eyed. "Whole." I said, "You win." She said, "This wasn't a competition." I said, "I was wrong." She looked at me and asked, "And now?" And in that moment, I understood. She wasn't punishing me. She was finally choosing herself. I went home that night, if you could call it that, to the tiny apartment I'd just moved into out in the suburbs. I sat at my second-hand desk, hands trembling, and wrote her a letter. I told her I'd found a job in a warehouse. That I was trying to start over. That I didn't know if she could ever forgive me, but that I finally understood. She was the only person who had ever loved me without asking for anything in return. I don't know if she'll ever respond. I don't expect her to. But I folded the letter carefully and mailed it anyway. Because the truth is, I still have a long way to go. There are debts I have to pay. Mistakes I have to fix. Ruins I created that I now have to rebuild, piece by piece. She gave me everything, her kindness, her patience, her strength. And I crushed it all beneath the weight of my own pride. She wasn't my ATM. She wasn't my safety net. She was my home. And I thought she'd never leave. But she did. Only now do I see. She had already given me everything. And now it's my turn. To spend what's left of this life. Becoming the kind of man who might finally be worthy of the love I once took for granted.